Welcome to part 6 of our continuing cybersecurity maturity model certification, or CMMC webinar series. This will be the final part of the series. We hope that you've attended and enjoyed the previous 5 webinars. So this is the culmination effort. So look forward to this one. We're always excited to provide additional knowledge, information, tools to help innovators out there, especially our non-traditional defense contractors, navigate the challenges of what can sometimes be a daunting CMMC program. I'm Mike Johnson. I'm with ATI, and just to cover a couple of quick notes before we get started. If you have any questions during today's webinar, if you could just put those in the Q&A instead of the chat. The attendees' mics are muted, so if you could just use that Q&A function if you have any questions. Everyone's favorite question that they want answered. The slides will be posted. They'll be posted to ATI's CMMC webpage. We'll provide that link in the chat for you, and we'll also display that later in the presentation. Also on that page, you'll find the slides and recordings of the 5 previous webinars. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our friends and welcome them back from Beryllium InfoSec. Derek White, he's their Chief Product Officer and one of the founders at QuickTrack and Beryllium. So with that, Derek, turn it over to you. Thanks.
All right, Mike, thank you very much. And of course, welcome back to those that have been through this webinar series with us since I think it was the end of May or middle of May, which is amazing that it's been 6 months with 6 webinars. But it's been great feedback so far. We've had great topics. We put these topics in these order on purpose, almost as if we had something to do with the CMMC final rule timeline, which we did not, but it happens to fall at a really good time since this was what we were hoping to talk about today as our final thing. And oddly enough, George Perez-Diaz from our team, new to our team within the last month, was actually supposed to be our scheduled guest anyway when we kicked this off originally. So it just so happened to work out that George has now joined our team. And George, I'm going to give you the mic here for just 30 seconds to talk about where you come from, why your background is critical to this conversation today, so that we can answer as much as we can, clarify as much as we can, and see what people need from us from that point.
Thank you, Derek. George Perez-Diaz. Like Derek mentioned, I'm the newer addition to the QuickTrack team, and very excited and happy to be here, especially here today during this presentation to discuss a very timely and critical item, which is the 32 CFR and the CMMC rule. Like I mentioned, George Perez-Diaz, I'm an Air Force veteran, started my IT career over 20 years ago, building networks, training personnel on how to behave with elevated access and how to do good things while they have that privilege authority to operate on a network. After the DoD Air Force life, I actually worked as a civilian for the Joint Chief of Staff, supporting command and control operations, nuclear command and control rather, and continuity of government. I decided to join the private sector after 6 years with the Joint Chief of Staff, where I was helping a prime contractor, Fortune 500 company, with their implementation of their CUI program. After the implementation of the program, I was given the opportunity to manage it. I did so successfully for 4 years. Out of those 4 years, I had the privilege to be assessed by the DIPCAC, managing over 14 system security plans. And as of 4 years ago, I decided to become a consultant and help many organizations instead of one. So looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And yeah, so George has been through, like all of us on the team and ATI. That's why we're here, was to put together resources, different perspectives on different topics, but really to bring some services to people and some trust and credibility. And George brings a lot of that to the team. So thank you, George. And so, yeah, we're going to try to do the impossible and get through what we feel is the most important parts of things that we just wanted to clarify, pull out, talk about real quick before we get to Q&A. We're going to try to do that in 30-ish minutes. Don't hold us to that, but that's the goal, so we can have a lengthy Q&A at the end, and we'll try to address as much as we can there. So, as George mentioned, we are talking about the CMMC rule that had a major milestone happen recently, and can't really highlight this enough, but today is mostly going to be about 32 CFR Part 170, which does mean that the CMMC program is here, and it is, as comes with some clarifications and some other details that we were all waiting to hear. But more importantly, it does go into effect December 16th, 2024. So when it passed through and was published on the Federal Register in October, there's a 60-day period before it goes into effect. So that date is important. There's things to know, there's things to understand. If people were waiting until this date, that's risky, but a lot of things change on December 16th, and some other things don't. So we'll walk through some of that. So just to clarify again, to hit this hammer, this nail in the head as hard as we can with the hammer, is nothing really changed from timelines, if you will, and what this represents. It's still a validation mechanism for your requirements that you have in your contracts today, or requirements in contracts that you're going to go after that you haven't had yet. This is a way for the DoD to have a program in place and requirements in place to say, you get to say to them that we are in good standing, so we can take that business on. So that's good, and it does come down to the data that you handle. So if you don't have CUI in your terms and conditions and requirements to protect it, you don't have to then therefore meet those requirements and not certify, for example, to CMMC level 2. If you're only handling federal contract information, then that's your requirements will be CMMC level 1. We're not going to go through all the nuances there, but it's still level 1, level 2, and level 3. And we now have a little bit more of a idea of the immediate impact and the rollout of this, what it means to you now and as time comes on. So, immediate impact. There are a lot of questions that came up right away. People are coming back out of the woodwork, if you will, trying to navigate what matters to them now versus what might matter to them later. So one of the first questions with the 32 CFR Part 170 CMMC program getting finalized is, can I schedule a CMMC assessment with a certified third-party assessment organization, an authorized C3PAO? The answer to that is yes, but a lot of people were waiting for this moment because they were prepared and they have everything ready to go. They've done their own readiness assessments or any other sort of truly led by a third-party assessment. They're in line. So the line to get into the candy store, if you will, is lengthy, and there aren't enough C3PAOs and CCAs and such and assessment teams to just walk up to the front of the line December 16th. That does not mean that that buys you any more time, for example, but if you are someone who was just chomping at the bit to get certified by a C3PAO, you can on December 16th. But we know that a lot of the top C3PAOs and those that have been filling up their calendars are booked out to April. I mean, it's a ways. So keep that in mind as a question that has now essentially been answered, is that yes, you can get a certification from a C3PAO. A couple things have to happen with the CMMC assessment process. Document has to be updated a little bit, but we expect that very soon. Second question is, can I get a CMMC certification by the C3PAO? So yes, and we put those in this order on purpose because these slides will be important later and this presentation will be important later to some people who didn't attend today. But yes, you can get that, and it can be required by your customer. Technically, the primes can require you to have a CMMC certification from a C3PAO. The DoD directly cannot. It cannot be a flow down in the contracts yet, all the way down, and we'll get to that in a second. but it is something that can be required by your customer. So be aware of that as well, but likely to be a lot of questions and details on the stuff that you have. Are you signed up? Do you have your readiness, etc.? Will be very, 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 already is very, very popular. What's going on? But there is more. So this is where the rulemaking process can get a little confusing. And George, I'll have you talk a little bit about this too. But there is a clarification that we have to make when it comes to the acquisition rule of CMMC, which will be DFARS 252.204-7021, the requirement that is in the contracts. It does say this is the level of CMMC that is required for anybody willing or anybody wanting to be awarded this business. And that 48 CFR milestone is going through its process, and not to get into all the details, but we expect to see something by the end of the year with are they going to make any changes from the open comment period, the effective date. So DOD is saying spring, March range 2025, probably around there to maybe midsummer 2025, expected to have that be done. And at that point, then yeah, the program exists because of 32 CFR part 170, and then it is a requirement in a contract is something that they can be put into place. So we'll walk through some of this, George. I know you've got a couple things you want to say here before we move on to the next slide. So I'll kick it over to you.
Yep. Thank you, Derek. Good recap. So from the top, 32 CFR parts 170. One of the things that is important to highlight here is that the DoD was intentional about calling out that this 32 CFR and the CMMC program does not alter the existing requirement. It's not there redefining what has been already communicated to be adequate security. Adequate security continues to be defined by DFAR 7012, and it is essentially saying that you have to implement mechanisms to protect the confidentiality of CUI, i.e. implement NIST 100-171. You have to have the ways and the mechanisms to report cyber incidents that affect the likelihood of unauthorized disclosure, destruction, etc. of CUI, which is having an external certificate and a connection mechanism to the DIBnet website. And that if you're using a cloud service provider, CSP, the process stores and transmits CUI, that the security items in 171 do not apply, that FedRAMP moderate and equivalent and its equivalency, it's what's required for those items. So again, today the requirements is DFARS 171, DFARS 252.204-7012. That is the existing requirement. So now saying that 32 CFR has gone into effect and the CMMC program is there, that is just essentially saying that all the documentation that we have seen from the CMMC, the Cyber AB, and the CAICO, et cetera, with the CMMC assessment guide, scoping guide for the self-assessments for FCI, all that documentation and the CMMC program, it's real now. There's no more, it's CMMC coming. When is CMMC coming? CMMC is here. It's 60 days later, December 16. It's essentially part of the rulemaking process. You go through the pre-rule exercise, the proposed rule, and then once the rule becomes final, the rule has to be published 60 days ahead of that identification of that implementation date, and that's essentially where we are today. On December 16, the DoD reserves the rights to ask for a subset of contracts to have a CMMC certification. Like Derek mentioned, your prime contractors, if they have already gone through a joint surveillance with the DoD and a C3PAO, and now they feel that they have met their obligations from DFAR 7012 and the future CMMC program, they have every right to say, hey, as part of my terms and condition is that you meet NIST 100-171, and in addition to that, you have at the very least a self-assessment equal to the requirement that the DoD is going to have when the CMMC program is final and effective, pending the 48 CFR.
Yep.
So also, while we're talking today, just real quickly, Derek, the 32 CFR, it's huge. It's a gigantic document. What we have done here is be intentional about covering what is specific to the OSC, to the organization seeking certification and assessment. There are a lot of caveats and information and defining factors for how the CMMC program is going to be established and how the C3PAOs and the certified professionals have to conduct themselves through the program. We're going to leave that out because it's not terribly important to the contractors that we're trying to focus on here.
Yeah, so the first thing we're going to roll through quickly is the what the DoD has always been referring to as their phased-in approach to. They use the term implementation of CMMC. That term I think sometimes gets a little abused. It doesn't mean that it has to be fully implemented before it becomes something that you're required to do or need to be addressing. So we're going to roll through. And we're pulling the document itself that George is just referencing. We're pulling out some parts, just screenshots specifically to talk about the 4 phases that have been defined, and we'll show you that roadmap here in a second. But George, I'll have you just run through the highlights here. We'll have them at the bottom here, but kind of talk through the DoD's mindset here, but also the OSC organization seeking certification or the organization seeking assessment, OSA mindset here on what this means.
Yeah, so this is just a quick snapshot from the 32 CFR itself. And what it's saying is that the implementation plan, it's going to be a 4-phased approach through several years, probably 4 years to be exact. And what the DoD has done from the proposed rule is that it has extended the initial rule, the initial phase to be 12 months, where before it was only 6 months. What that means to you is that today, as of today, right now or yesterday, you want to start documenting everything that you're doing to protect the confidentiality of CUI. Everything meaning how you have centralized the CUI in a subsegment of your network. Have you created a cloud enclave? Anything that you have done, including your physical security aspect, your physical security and whatnot. So nothing has changed here. Again, DFAR 7012 and 7020 have said for the last 4 years that you're going to implement NIST 171, that you're going to do a basic / self-assessment of your program using NIST 171 alpha, that you're going to upload that score into the SPRS, and that you're going to continue to meet compliance, per the life of that contract. Phase 1 is reemphasizing that. And now, per the CMMC, you're going to use the CMMC self-assessment guide for level 1 to do the self-assessment on those 15/17 controls that are specific to federal contract information, or FCI. And then you're going to do the same for CMMC level 2 when and if your organization has CUI or plans to have CUI. That you're going to do a self-assessment and do those same things. One of the things that are going to be slightly different here in this 32 CFR and the CMMC program is that part of the phase 1, meaning in the next 60 days and in 16 December, you have to have an affirming official identified within the organization. That is someone that have said, yes, I agree with the score. I agree with the scoping of the CUI and the CUI boundaries per one of the previous presentations that we have, and Derek is going to share those here shortly. I agree with the scope. I agree with the controls that have been implemented, and I am signing a letter to the DoD and uploading it to the SPRS website saying that I'm going to continue to meet those controls for the next 12 months. That is a major change, because now it's not just I do have a system security plan, final or draft, and I have done a self-assessment, good, bad, or indifferent. Now, as someone at the highest level of your organization, attesting, affirming to the DoD that has been validated and verified, and they not only have been validated and verified for that point in time, but that we're committed to continue to provide that level of security for the next 12 months until the next self-assessment.
Yep.
Anything that we left out there, Derek?
Well, I'll say the 2 biggest things to recap that for anybody that this is not tracking or is making you raise your eyebrows a little bit. 1, what George just said is true. Just because it says self-assessment is not intended, and now it's clear. as somebody or your organization at the highest level is going to say, this is true, we know, I will back this. And if that's not, then that's a bad situation, specifically if it's, I assume that we are situation. We've talked at length about that through this program. That's been the message down from the DoD since day one. But if you remember, when the DFARS interim rule came out with 7019 and 7020, that was the bridge of that was a big step for accountability for these organizations to say, okay, we have to self-assess. It didn't say you had to have everything done. It didn't say you had to be perfect. It just said you had to have a score entered using a system security plan and all that kind of stuff. It was a bridge. That's exactly what that was. That bridge is now over to the other side where you don't want to be in that situation. The reason that the number 2 point here is that the reason that they can't say have a C3PO do this is the bottleneck. It would be a fumbled phase 1. That's why they want to phase this in. But in the way we've been speaking to people is that whether you have a C3PO do it or you do it yourself, you have to be ready, right? That's what this whole series has been about up to this point, is making sure the stuff that we're going to talk about here coming up is true, it is accurate, you've got it documented and you understand it, because that's what these assessors or anybody you're using for a self-assessment need to know. So we'll kind of
Derek,
breathe. Yep, go ahead.
let's stay here real quickly because there were 2 things that I left out that you just reminded me of, and it was the accuracy of the self-assessments. Before 2016, December 16 of 2024, there was such thing as give me a system security plan, and you don't need to be perfect or even near perfect. All they wanted, the DoD was asking for, was exactly something. And plans of actions and milestones to give me more than just the bare minimum. Essentially saying, yeah, you can have a negative score, and as long as you have a plan of actions and milestones documenting that you're going to be 110 out of 110 in a given point in time, that's sufficient for the DoD back then. As of December 16, that is no longer true, because that was another one of the biggest changes, is that for level 1, the DoD is saying that they are not interested in you having, and the OSAs, Organization Seeking Certification, having plans of actions and milestones. That is essentially gone. You have to meet the 15 controls as defined in the CMMC level 1 self-assessment guide implemented. There are no plans of actions and milestones there. You either pass or you fail. It's a binary. And then for level 2, you only have a subset of requirements that you're allowed to have plans of actions and milestones. Go ahead, Derek.
I was just going to say that's a great little teaser to what's coming up here in a second, because
Oh, did I give too much? My bad.
no, but that's good, because some of that information has been clarified, and some of it did have some more details and definitions so that we understand how that process will go. So we'll move through phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. It's again, it's the DoD's way of saying this is how we plan to do it, and it evolves phase by phase. I don't think we have to spend a ton of time on each phase here, but you can start to see by reading these the words right from the document, from the DoD's perspective, how they need to get to a point where every contract that goes out to there's some, this is DoD specific right now, so remember that too here for a little bit, is that eventually every contract's going to have it in there, 1, 2, or 3, level 1, level 2, or level 3, and this is how they plan to do it. So we can highlight some major things here on these quickly, George, and then we can move on.
Yeah, the 2 quick points here, and you have already bolded letters here, is that in phase 2, 12 months from December 2026, you can expect to see the CMMC level 1 in contracts and CMMC level 2 with a CMMC with a C3PAO formal assessment in contracts, and some CMMC level 3. Level 3 is extremely important. You want to find out today if your prime contractors or the DoD expects you to have a CMMC level 3, because it is a different beast than what we've been playing with for the last 17, 15 years, depending on how long you've been doing it. So CMMC level 3 has it's essentially asking you to create a boundary and or an enclave within an enclave and have sub processes. So identifying that contract and / regulatory requirements within your environment today will be extremely valuable, because it will take some time.
Yeah, and if you're looking at level 3 as a differentiator for your business, just know that you have to have level 2 first. And
Yeah.
I wouldn't prioritize level 3 right now, but you essentially would have a pretty good idea if that. I mean, those are like George said, that's a big deal. That's advanced persistent threat. It's above the adequate security level that level 2 is. Then the DoD is trying to implement across as a baseline. So just know that this is you're going to start to see here with phase 3. You're going to start to see another year. By then, more people have certifications, more C3PAOs and CCAs will be around. Solicitations can have, it starts to come together more, and they don't want to rush it. But again, it comes down to some people are on 5-year fixed contracts and won't see a new contract in the next 3 years. What happens to them? That's a conversation that we can have offline on what to prepare for there. If you already have the requirements, there's a lot of things you can do to make sure that your customer isn't starting to look at who's going to play ball with us and who's not, because we can't play with you if you're not going to have these requirements in place when we need you to. So I don't know, level phase 3, phase 4, pretty straightforward, I think, in our point. I want to make sure that we just keep moving through here. At the end of the day, phase 4, full implementation. So at that point, the word implementation from the DoD is at this point, every contract's going to have it. They're going to have level 1, level 2, or level 3, and your specifics on what you're going to need to meet for that contract will be in the contract. So there's time between now and then, but that's not what the number that and the timeline that people should be looking at. And if you want to see what that looks like from the DoD's perspective on what their chart is, this is straight from the document. Just a couple things to highlight here for the rest of this presentation and the here and now, which is this is what we're talking about today. This is what matters now. Immediate impact is, we don't have to keep saying it, but if you haven't started or you haven't figured out exactly what you need to know to do this, the longer you wait, the longer it's just going to become a bigger risk, because in some cases they highlighted this, they've talked about this. The DoD has the right to advance some things when they feel it's necessary, and they are prioritizing certain contracts and certain things with more critical aspects to it. But there are supply chain situations here where some people can't service their deliverable if their subs don't have what's required. So just know that that is possible, and nobody wants to be in that conversation from there. So
Yeah, just one thing here, Derek, real quickly. This is a slide directly from the DoD, and thank you for adding. I'm sorry, from the federal government, because it's the Federal Registry, not the DoD, but the DoD is hosting it on their website as well. In this presentation, as you can see, says that phase 1 begins at 48 CFR rule effective date. However, the 32 CFR rule says it says the phase 1 will begin December 16, 2024, or when the complementary rule 48 CFR is published. So that bottom portion there that you have highlighted in red, it's already starting to surface that they are starting effective date 2016, and 48 CFR is just going to be the mechanism to add CMMC as a contractual requirement.
I'm going to answer a question that came in live right now. Great question. If you are going to be handling classified documents, classified information, that is out of scope of CMMC. So level 3 is still CUI, Advanced Persistent Threat, NIST 800-172, which just had some updates this week as well. But classified data, classified documents is out of scope of CMMC. So that is something to clarify. If contracting officer opportunities you're chasing, make sure those details are specific. That's a different ball of wax. So
yeah, just one additional clarification item, Derek. Yes, CMMC and the CUI program was born to protect unclassified information and does not apply to secret, top secret, and classified programs and documents. However, the contract information that comes with that classified program may fall under the CUI. So while everything that you're doing is in the classified space will be managed through NIST 853 and their RMF risk management framework, that it's on a different network, different enclave, but your contract information will have federal contract information, and maybe also will have CUI. So you may be required to have a way and a mechanism to collect that information from SAM.gov securely, and then move it through your organization into your 853 RMF program securely.
Yep. And the process of doing that and what to pay attention to, all the things that we are going to talk about regarding what's coming up here with some of the key concepts and changes and some of the stuff that matters to the CMMC and CUI program are important to that, but it's a different thought process, different outcome of handling data when it comes down to secret, top secret, classified, etc. So we're going to move on here quick to key concepts and changes. So we wanted to pull out the stuff here that matters to the assessments and what happens for the assessment. If you remember, or maybe you haven't, but if you were on the previous webinar, we had Fernando on, a C3PO, a CCA, walk through at that moment in time what we knew about the assessments. Very, very good detail there. It was really, really good feedback from that webinar. I encourage you to watch that one. Some of this will clarify some of the things that he was walking everybody through the last time. So George, same thing. I'll let you roll through this here from your perspective, and then we'll move on to the next section, but we'll go from here.
Yeah, so I like that the DoD included this information as the phased approach and what to expect in each one of the levels. So what they're saying is that when you go through your self-assessment, you're going to have some predefined outputs and outcomes of that self-assessment and the program in general. And those are, you either are going to fail the assessment because you don't have what you're required to have, or the person that is doing the assessment for you on your behalf did not have a high level of assurance that you were meeting the intent of the requirements in general. We were very intentional about scratching out the conditional. That means that you are allowed to have plans of actions and milestones, and that you don't meet all the requirements. That doesn't exist in CMMC level 1. So level 1, you can either fail the assessment or you can have a final self-assessment at the level 1, meeting all the requirements. And you have to keep the evidence of that self-assessment for a whooping 6 years. So that's going to be, it's not necessarily very taxing, but it's something that is absolutely new. Then you get into the CMMC level 2, which is, again, you can either have a self-assessment per the contract, or you can have a C3PAO assessment as you get into phase 2 and 3 and phase 4 of the implementation plan. But as of today, December 16, rather, when you do your self-assessment, you can either fail the assessment, same thing. You don't have enough of the right things, and you don't meet the that threshold that the DoD has defined, meaning you don't have 88 points total out of your self-assessment. And the scoring is following the existing scoring today, which is the DoD assessment methodology. And if we don't have a link to that, Derek, we probably want to make it available to them. Yep. Or even a tool to do that calculation for them. Yep. But anyways, you have to score 88, and then and only then you can give yourself a conditional if you score 88 or less than 110. The conditional cannot include those requirements that are rated or weighted by the DoD as 5 and 3. You can only give yourself POM, plans of actions and milestones, for any requirement that has a value of 1 point. And that's when you get the conditional. The conditional is only good for 180 days. So the DoD is being very trusting and ensuring that you have that level of self-accountability internally. Report the score, 88 or better. If that is the case, give yourself 180 days plans of actions and milestones to fix any gaps and remediate any of those items that might be missing. And then come back 180 days later and update your score to hopefully at 110 out of 110. And now you have a final CMMC self-affirming score. Or the same is true for the C3PAO. The only difference between your self-assessment and the C3PAO score, and if you're done your self-assessment correctly, is that the C3PAO will enter the score on your behalf. They will go into the SPRS. I believe there's going to be a connection between EMAS and the SPRS, and that's how your score is going to be pre-populated. The additional value there from having a C3PAO doing your self-assessment is that if I am the DoD and I see that 3 organizations that I'm trying to consider for a contract have a score and they all are 110, and there's one of the vendors that has 110 validated by a third-party assessment organization, there's a little bit of more value and higher level of assurance that one organization is indeed meeting the intent of the requirements versus the other two organizations that only have a self-assessment. Just something to keep in mind. And then, of course, at the level 3, it's not necessarily terribly important because that is the DIPCAC doing the assessment, and the values are still the same. You fail the assessment, conditional or final, but nonetheless is going to be done by the DIPCAC. The one thing here that we don't mention on level 2 and level 3 and level 2 specifically is that the 47012 and 7020 tells you the DoD reserves the right to send the DIPCAC and do a DIPCAC high assessment on any organizations and on any other contractors. And you, by signing the D47012, 7020, and agreeing to that clause, you're making your personnel, your systems, and your organization facilities available to the DoD to be able to conduct those assessments. So make sure that you have accurate assessments being performed and reported up the chain. There was a quick question there, Derek, asking for the confirming or / affirming official, and who will that be? Where will that be? That will be captured in the SPRS. I checked the SPRS last week, and there's no mechanism there just yet to upload the letter from the affirming official. So I'm expecting that's going to be available on or shortly after December 16. But we'll keep track of that and communicate to our friends.
All right. Deficiencies. So temporary deficiencies poems. You touched on this a little bit. This was another thing that the details have been thrown around and discussed in open comment stuff. So we'll just touch on this real quick. Your initial thoughts on this, George, and why and what's important the most, and then I'm going to phrase up a question and see if it makes sense.
Added clarification from the DoD is always welcome and refreshing. So essentially what they're saying here is that for those items, for those outputs and outcomes that are conditional and the required plan of actions and milestone, you can still meet the intent of the CMMC level 2 and potentially 3 requirements, as long as you show progress in your plans of actions and milestones. What has happened since D47012 in 2017 is that unfortunately, we have taken advantage of the vagueness in the way in which the regulatory requirement is written. The DoD said back then, hey, you're going to implement NISA 10171 by December 31st, 2017, or as soon as practical. And as soon as practical has been, here we are, 2024, and I know that there's a lot of organizations that still have plans of actions and milestone open from 2017 or whenever, shortly after they created their CUI program. What the DoD is saying here is that, hey, if we show up and you show progress, i.e. you have milestones showing this is what I'm going to do in Q1, this is how I'm going to address that one particular poem in Q2, and you're moving towards resolution, you will continue to have a favorable outcome and be able to continue to perform. Otherwise, you're going into the red and fail. So that's how I interpreted that flexibility has been built in, because at the end of the day, what the DoD needs from everybody involved, including in this call, is to continue to collaborate with industry, continue to maximize on the things that industry is doing really, really well, and enable the war fighters to continue to be lethal, as the DoD often says.
So the question that comes up, and it really has come up over the years, but more recently, what happens if I'm pretty sure, I was very confident going into my assessment with a C3 PAO, and one of or a couple of my 5-point requirements according to the DoD assessment methodology scorecard, or my 3-point is not met. Say I missed 4, and I drop below, maybe it's 5. I drop below the 88 or the 80%. So what happens to those not met requirements? Is it a failure? What happens there?
Yeah, so ideally, that would be something that is identified during phase 1 of the CMMC assessment process. I think it's still phase 1, which is the readiness review. I'm going to jump on a call with the C3PAO, me, organization seeking certification. We're going to talk about my system categorization. This is CUI, this is not, etc. and this is how I've built my system security plan. And likely have some high-level discussions about the technology that I have implemented, which oftentimes those that are rated at a level 5, it's going to be a technology or a technical control, because those are the requirements that are critical, most critical to the confidentiality of CUI. So hopefully that's one. There during the readiness review, C3PAO and OSA identify some gaps, and they say, I'm not ready, come back in 120 days or whatever the case may be to fix that potential gap or weakness. If we go into the assessment with the C3PAO or even the DoD, one of the nice things about the entire process is that at the end of each day with the C3PAO or the DIPCAC, you're going to get a report that says this requirement or requirements are trending not met, meaning you have been showing me enough evidence to support that you're meeting the intent of the requirement. So by tomorrow morning, hopefully, Derek, you and I can jump and give additional evidence, artifacts to change your mind from trending to not met or fail. Now it's I see enough of the right things, and change the outcome of that particular control. Mm-hmm. If at the end of that 5th day or whatever the case may be during the assessment week, those 5 controls are not met, then you can have a plans of actions and milestones for 180 day and go into what the CAP today says, the CMMC assessment process says, phase 4. Hey, C3PAO, either the original C3PAO or a different C3PAO. I've closed those gaps within the 180-day period that I'm allowed. Can you come back and reassess those controls? And that's how we'll move forward to get a CMMC level 2 or 3 assessment.
So definitely more on that conversation later. So if that's, but the overall message here, of course, then is if you have certain areas you're concerned about, have someone work with you to give their third-party opinion on whether that will meet it or not with their professional opinion. That carries a lot of weight. So make sure you're considering that. All right, moving on. We're tracking a shade behind my hope of the 35-minute situation here. So definitions and clarification. So we're going to roll through some of this stuff just again to highlight the fact that some of this didn't change. Some of the anchor pieces that are needed for your success under CMMC didn't drastically change. Some things became a little bit more clear. So we'll roll through this one, George. The first one, system security plan. You probably mentioned this document 74 times already in this webinar. So anything to add there before we move on to the next couple?
It's a must requirement. Build one today, make it pretty, make it functional. And sign it, because it's only a good document if it's approved. Yep. That's all I'm going to say, because due to time, but
yes, and we've provided some free resources in previous webinars too, that if you need somewhere to start or you're not sure if it's detailed enough, again, that's what ATI is here for. That's what we're here for. That's the whole point of this, is you need to know that stuff, not assume that stuff. So happy to help there. Security protection data. This has been a fun one since the proposed rule stuff went out. Touch on this a little bit here so that we can kind of get into a little bit more depth on how this impacts the scope.
So to me, this hasn't changed at all. From day one, NIST 10171 calls out security protection asset, not necessarily in the same way, but systems that provide security protection to the CUI, right? Process, store, transmit, or protect CUI. This is the or protect CUI system. And that system is going to generate certain data components, which oftentimes is your audit logs, which you have the AU family and CMMC and NIST 10171, and then that information and configuration items are supposed to be protected. So it was an additional clarification item for industry, but not something terribly new and to get excited about.
Yeah, there were some nuances that people were interested to see what would come out, and so it was nice to see that, because it affects things like external service providers, which was another hot topic as the open comment period was waiting for feedback.
And I like that, Derek, that you mentioned that, because that was the other thing, was the SPDs were that was a rumor that it was going to become CUI. Not the case. So external services provider, that was a huge win, because that was one of the most confusing and controversial conversations, because it was, if you're an external services provider, you are a cloud service provider. If you are a cloud service provider, then you need FedRAMP. That's no longer the case. The DoD was very specific here at defining who and what is considered an external service provider, and it depends on the data that you handle and how you access those systems, processing, storing that data.
So as we get into the asset categories, just to, again, highlight what was clarified, what was determined. For those that have been with us through 1 through 5, part 3, where Jeff Baldwin and Heather Engel went through data segmentation, enclaving, enterprise approach. We really spent a lot of time on evolving from the part 2, which was the scoping of the sensitive data, but into the assets and into what that data is, transmission, storing, processing, etc. So go back and watch that one for this next section. If this is making you feel a little confused or a little worrisome, that was a great piece. Again, just highlighting the fact that these are all here. Mike dropped the link, and we'll show it at the end where all of these live, but a great resource to save into your bookmarks on your browser so that you can go back to these webinars when needed. So start with security protection assets again. That was another thing, Georgia, I think you've hit on this a few times, but just to clarify a couple things with those asset categories.
Yeah, so security protection asset oftentimes is the security system or system components that separates your CUI, your control and classify information assets, from the rest of the network. Think about it as a firewall. Think about your endpoint detection and response. Think about anything that has to do with protection and or monitoring of those systems that have CUI. So the quick win on this one was that they no longer need a CMMC certification, which it was an assumption by industry. It does need to be protected. It does need to be documented, really well documented in your system security plan, but it doesn't need to be CMMC level 2 or 3.
Yeah, still in scope of the requirements, just not needing their own separate CMMC assessment themselves. Which comes down to the ones and zeros, really then comes down to the data types. Again, previous webinars, we talk about this, but the data types that drive how you're going to do this and what then gets deemed a certain asset is everything at the end of the day, if you really strip it down to that level.
Yep. So real quickly, think about if-then statements. If I'm handling CUI and my system has CUI, processing, storing CUI, then that's a CUI asset. Plain and simple, hopefully.
Yep.
If the data type is security protection data, then that's a security protection asset. It has AU and configuration items and whatnot. Plain and simple. If that security protection asset also has CUI, it has CUI. It's like dividing and multiplying things by 0. What else we got there, Derek? Oh boy, there they are.
Yes.
Security protection.
Yes.
I'm sorry, ESP and cloud services. So again, going back to D4 7012, there's additional specificity in the 32 CFR. It is an external services provider. When it falls under the definition and category of a cloud services provider, then that bad boy is going to need FedRAMP moderate or equivalent. Derek, why don't you add a little bit of flavor on that first bullet?
So we don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this one because it does get into the specifics of you, the organization, and how you handle. But there was some clarification here. So and managed service providers, for example, there was this thought that every MSP that is processing, storing CUI or security protection data, whatever it was going to be, would need a CMMC level 2 certification prior to you getting one, which was going to be a nightmare scenario if that happened. So that was a little more clarity. So the way to think about this is what George just said. You think about the services, the technologies that your MSP or whoever's you're working with is whatever tools they're using. Are they using cloud services? Are they not? It's your responsibility as the OSA and the OSC to make sure that those things are met. An MSP, for example, that doesn't handle CUI but is required within your scope to meet requirements for other aspects are part of your assessment scope, and might have to be in every single customer that they have that has these requirements. They may have to sit through every one of those assessments to demonstrate that. Becomes a very daunting task. So there's a lot of MSPs who don't want to handle CUI for that very reason. And that's where, can you segment that? That's all the stuff we've talked about in the past. The nice thing is it's clearer FedRAMP moderate equivalency. That memo went out at the end of the year last year. We'll see how that plays out as time goes on, when things can be body of evidence and other acceptable documentations and validations from your perspective can be met within your documentation and inherited in that way. But just know that this does matter. This is everything that we've been talking about for 5 months, 6 months has come down to there's more clarity on what you can do with who you work with, what vendors you use, down to your scope, down to your data, et cetera. So a couple important considerations. We want to roll through a couple things here that are probably going to open more conversations for a later date. We're happy to have these conversations again. ATI, this is their team they want to help, right? So that's the whole point of all this. So OSAs and ESPs, we just talked about this. We'll continue to talk about this. It comes down to your responsibility to determine your scope, your boundaries, technologies, people, processes, locations, etc., on where the CUI is and isn't. And if you can shrink it down to less people, less places, less things, that makes it easier to manage. Sure, if you can't do that, then you have an enterprise approach, which can be a fairly daunting task to small companies or medium-sized companies, or those more non-traditionals, as Mike said when we kicked this off, on how that is to be handled. But they made those, nothing changed here. That is requirements that you have to meet as you put your program together. Same with cloud service providers. So if they're processing CUI, they must either have their FedRAMP moderate authorization, which you just can't go get. They don't do 500 of those a year, but that's why they have the equivalent requirements, which is clearer than it used to be. And so that's another big thing moving forward, that cloud service providers that are going to continue to have their services be within the defense industrial base will have to meet those as well. If they're not processing CUI, then it doesn't require the FedRAMP certification. Assessor's obligations. This is another thing we wanted to just highlight. It kind of goes without saying, but we do get a lot of questions on this still. But your assessors, the assessment teams, the C3PAOs that are coming in and doing this have to meet their own obligations. They cannot shake your hand and say, yeah, you're going to be fine, or don't worry about it, or convince me otherwise, or anything like that. They aren't going to share your results with other people. They're not going to go make fun of anybody in open forums or even private forums. They have to meet their obligations. They want you to pass. I mean, that's what it comes down to. They want this to be efficient. They want this to go well. The success of this matters. And we're going to highlight a couple things on it was nice to see, but as George said, we don't have to overly worry about the how the assessors are going to do it and everything that matters to the ecosystem. But they do have to meet background checks. So there's more details here on having how many people are on an assessment team. That wasn't really clear, and now it is. And more people on an assessment team means more CCAs, which are the assessors that are certified to do these assessments. C3PAOs have to put these things together, but they're not just going to have some Joe Schmo who passed an exam lead your assessment. So that's good. That's comforting. That's how it should be. But they have a lot to get in line themselves and get things ready to go. And again, that will all help as time goes on to make sure that these are assessments and processes that can be done, certifications that can be obtained at the ready, so that more people can bid on more contracts specific to DoD, which we're going to talk about in a second. Trying to roll through some of this quick because we did go over here a little bit. So new definitions around this. Again, we'll talk about this more if you want to privately, around test equipment and assessors' responsibilities, just ecosystem stuff that has come up. Waivers for CMMC requirements. George, I don't know if you want to spend a minute on this quick so we can touch on the
just don't expect any waivers. Just implement what you have to do and move on.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk that people will be able to say, I can't, or whatever. Don't expect that. We do want to talk about this. One major thing that did happen since the last webinar is that not necessarily specifically related to CMMC, which is a DoD program at the moment, is the FAR CUI rule, which had kind of sat in stalemate territory for a while, but it has moved on to the next phase, and it was moved through the OIRA review, so it is moving on. The FAR CUI rule will have a major impact across federal agencies, so not just specific to DoD, for how the CUI program is is maintained and met. And so this is all in response to the executive order. We talked about this on webinar 1 in our timeline of what to expect. So we didn't know exactly when this was going to happen, but now that we do, as of October, it moves to open comment period. And we saw a pretty brief, compared to how it's worked in the past, comment period get addressed on one of the CMMC side. So it will be interesting to see what happens here. But the goal has always been to have a CUI program that's unified across all agencies, not just DoD. So thinking ahead, we expect to see this published in the Federal Register by the end of November. That can move, as we've seen, but that's what's expected. And then, that process is going to move forward, and you can assume that there is going to be a similar CMMC type process across these federal agencies to validate that those that are responsible for handling CUI are meeting the requirements, which will be NIST 800 171. So keep this in mind. This is something to track, whether you have to set up Google alerts or continuously talk to ATI. Again, we're here and happy to help that, but we have a lot of customers that are not just DoD, and they're federal and DoD. And how will this impact them? Happy to have that conversation. We'll get to some questions here. I know we have a couple minutes left. As always, the website, which Mike dropped in the chat, is going to be on the slides, which will be available on that website later. You can scan the QR code as well, but that will have every single presentation we've done, all the slide decks that go with that, contact information you can see there, ours and ATI's, so that we can address questions. So we got a couple minutes left here. I want to roll through the ones that I said that we would answer live, and we'll try to be brief on a couple of these, but the question of revision 2 versus revision 3 when it comes to NIST 800 171. George, I'm going to let you answer that one. It's a great question, but we did have some updates on that to not make that a gray area, if you will.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it right now. Focus on revision 2, implementing revision 2. One of the nice things about 32 CFR is that there's indicators there that if you're moving towards CMMC, NIST 800 171 revision 3, it's okay to do so, but make sure that you can still generate and meet the requirements for revision 2. And there's some nuances in revision 3 that doesn't necessarily align 1-to-1.
Yep.
But the requirement today is revision 2, focus on revision 2.
Revision 2 is the requirement, yes.
But yeah. Sorry, Derek, it has a second part there for when do we think we'll see it. What's going to happen, you'll see that the C3PAOs likely are going to be the ones leading that change. So as soon as you see information about the C3PAOs implementing NIST 800 171 Rev 3, and that the CMMC program starting to update their documentation to be able to assess those programs, then that's probably a cue to start shifting.
Yep. Okay, next question. For level 1 self-assessment, do you have to have a live VPC in operation, or can you state what controls you will implement if awarded a contract? Another excellent question.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it quickly. Yeah, no, you don't need a virtual PC. You don't need to change your environment too drastically for CMMC level 1. However, you want to know where that federal contract information is and who has access to that information, and document how you're meeting the controls, the 15 controls. We'll add a link to the CMMC level 1 self-assessment guide here, and it will tell you specifically which requirements are in scope there.
So if we didn't, yes, the presentation will be posted on the website. I made sure I addressed that one. Some of the other questions, if you want to have conversation, it doesn't cost money to talk to us or ATI. Use the emails that you see on the screen from the website. Reach out to us. Happy to have however long it takes to have conversations to help clarify things and help you essentially not walk down the street at night alone. That's kind of, don't do that. That's not a smart idea. So we want to make sure that there's resources and whatever it takes for you guys to get what you need. And yeah, this is about as much as we could jam into 1 hour. So thank you, George. Thank you, ATI, again, for setting this up, and for those that attended. I'm going to kick it back over to Mike for wrapping up.
Yep. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, George. Thank everyone who attended today. I know we're running short on time. Key takeaways. CMMC's here. It's not going away. It's going to be required. Get assessed. If you need help getting assessed, reach out to one of the many registered providers out there. Reach out to us again at the email addresses, and we can point you to someone. Good luck, and we hope everyone found this informational. Thank you. Appreciate it.